way or there will be trouble.
Of course, machines can't think as people do. A machine is different.
Being, what marvelous being! How gratifying! How gratifying!
Well, let me introduce myself first. My name is Commander Joel Jackal. I work at the Challenger Center in Airmont, New York. That's actually my part-time job. I work there on the weekends. My full-time job is I'm a high school science teacher. I teach earth science and astronomy. I actually took my astronomy class to see this movie. First time I saw this movie was with my wife because she told me about the book. I didn't even know this was going to be. I didn't even know this was a book until I saw the trailer. I got the book. My wife grabbed it before I had a chance to read it. She read it. Then she read it in 2 days, and I read it in 2 days, and I couldn't wait to see it. So first weekend it came out, my wife and I saw it. 2 days later, I knew that I was going to have my class see it, so I had to see it for myself and take notes. Yeah. Then I took my class to see it, so it was the third time. And then I got the DVD, so it was 4. Today would be 5.
Good.
And it is my favorite movie. It is definitely my favorite movie because, for the most part, the science is right. And I'm actually very hesitant to call this movie science fiction because most of the science is right. I actually would call it more science future than science fiction because this is stuff we're going to do.
Yeah. So let's talk about that because this is our Science on Screen series. So, you know, let's go to the basics. Could you actually grow potatoes like that on Mars the way they did it?
Well, we know because we sent up probes in Pathfinder and Curiosity and Spirit and Opportunity, we've sent up 4 rovers since 1997. We're sending another one up in 2020. We know the chemical composition of the Martian soil. We know that. We can simulate that. And then we can see if we can grow stuff in it by adding nutrients.
Would he be able to produce enough nutrients to do the growing, or would you need more nutrients?
Well,
I guess he was using the nutrients from
he used his crewmates for a while as well. Plus, he was producing his own. And I know it's a little bit disgusting, but in situations like this, you work with what you got and you make it work. And it is totally possible to do that. In fact, there's a desert down in Peru, which is very similar to the surface conditions on Mars. And NASA is running an experiment there right now. They scooped up about 3/4 of a ton of soil from this desert. They brought it over to Lima, where they have a controlled experimental environment, and they have 60 different varieties of potatoes to see which one essentially grows the best. Because if we're going to go to Mars, we're going to have to grow our own food because we can't take everything we need with us. So that not only is it something that we can do, but it's something that NASA is actively experimentally pursuing to optimize the output of food once we do get to Mars.
Cool. Well, talking about taking food with us, I know everybody's excited to try the astronaut ice cream, and I think Shakun's here. We have astronaut ice cream for everybody to try. If you don't want to try the ice cream, we also have freeze-dried grapes that they bring into space.
No French fries, given the potatoes?
No French fries. Yeah, we thought we had too much potatoes. So if Noah and Miles could hand that out. If you want ice cream or grapes, just ask. They'll bring them to you, and you can try them. But let's talk about how they make this food. I mean, do they really freeze-dry everything?
There is some food that is freeze-dried that NASA uses, but NASA tends not to use the freeze-dried food anymore. They do have some where they heat water and add to it, and it's dehydrated, and so they don't eat it freeze-dried. They have warm water, and it's warm and it's hot and it's rehydrated. But there's also MREs, military MREs, that you could get at a camping store, you get at Army surplus store. These boxes with brown bags inside, and that's what they have on the space station right now. So that would be the primary food source if you're doing a mission on Mars or in space at all. But if you're going to have a longer mission, you're going to have to grow stuff. You're not going to be able to bring everything you need with you because every pound of cargo takes a huge amount of fuel to get off the surface of the Earth. So the less you have to bring with you, the better it is.
Right. So what was the freeze-dried ice cream was it always supposed to be eaten dry, or was it supposed to be added water?
No, that's supposed to be dry. Yeah.
And they got away from that. Why did they get away from that?
Some of the freeze-dried food, when it's freeze-dried, don't taste so good.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, and the first space food back in the '60s was basically in just tubes, and you almost like open the tube and just like almost like baby food.
Right.
So, if you're gonna have a space program, you're gonna want good morale for your astronauts in space. They're going through enough as it is. Some good food helps. So they improved the technology on the food a great deal. So the astronaut ice cream is a thing that's sold at museums and planetariums, and we sell it at the Challenger Center too. But it's not used. It's not really that method of producing food isn't really a staple for NASA anymore.
Right. And now they have like the SpaceX programs, right? That are like basically cargo ships that are delivering.
Yeah,
to the space
SpaceX is doing some amazing work. I don't know if you guys saw the first time they landed a booster.
On the water, right?
Yeah, no, on the boat. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
A week ago this past Friday, and the thing is with a spacecraft, the booster is 98% of your cost. So they just saved 98%.
Yeah.
For their next launch. So this is going to make space travel cheaper, more commonplace, and it's really some amazing technology. Right now, SpaceX is only launching supply missions. So is another company called ULA, United Launch Alliance. There's another company, Orbital, doing it, all private companies. But next year or within 2 years, SpaceX is going to be launching our own astronauts, so we don't have to pay the Russians anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, ever since the space shuttle was grounded. The problem is NASA's budget is so small that you can't maintain an old spacecraft and design and build a new one at the same time. So you had to scrap the space shuttle, put them in museums, take that money, and start building designing a new spacecraft. And so we had to pay the Russians to send our men and women up to the space station. Next year or 2 years from now, we're not going to have to do that anymore. An American company is going to do it, which I think is great. We shouldn't have to depend on another country for this. And so the entire low Earth orbit area of space exploration is going to be privatized, which is a good thing because that means NASA could put its research and development money into missions outside of Earth orbit, going back to the moon, eventually maybe getting to Mars in the next 20, 25 years. So SpaceX's contributions is a great thing. It's going to make space travel cheaper, more common. It frees up NASA to do what's supposed to do, which is new things, not old things. We don't have to pay NASA to do old things. We want NASA to do new things. New things are exciting. New things get people interested. New things get people excited about NASA again, instead of doing the same old, same old.
Right. We're going to open it up to the audience for questions. So if you have a question, put your hand up, and Miles will come around with the microphone. But I have a question when we're going to ask that. Could they really take off from Mars without a cone on the nose?
Mars's atmosphere is really, really thin. It's only about 1% as thick as Earth's. So if all you need to do is have a shell to keep the air in, if he's wearing a spacesuit, there's no reason to not have, you would rather have it than not, but given the fact that you needed to go a lot faster, you have the same rockets. To go faster, you need to decrease your mass. So there's no better way to do it than taking as much off as you possibly can. So can it be done? Not ideally, but in a situation less than ideal, sometimes we have to make decisions that we wouldn't normally make under normal circumstances. So there's no reason why you wouldn't do it if you had to, but you wouldn't do it if you didn't.
Right. You have a question right there?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, I think every young person should see this film because it has to just jazz young people up about math and science.
There are going to be people. I'm telling you this. I've said that for the first time I saw this. There are going to be kids today who in 20, 30 years are going to be engineers, and they're going to say, I decided to become an engineer because of that movie.
Well, it's
going to happen.
Brilliantly executed.
I wish the movie like this came out when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right.
However, my question is,
yes,
that was a very, very diverse group of scientists and astronomers and physicists and engineers and mathematicians and propulsion, and a lot of women. I'm curious what your knowledge, to what extent are women actually that well represented? That really I was delighted to see it, but curious how realistic it is.
Today, it's trending towards that direction. Obviously, many more professional fields were dominated by men for a long time. There were no women astronauts. There was a woman cosmonaut back in the 60s, but even the Russians didn't send another woman cosmonaut up until the 80s. We didn't have a female astronaut until Sally Ride in the early 80s. And the engineering field, well, by and large, dominated by men, not only men, but white men. So it's not only gender, it's race. But today, things are, they're equalizing. There's an active push to get girls not only interested, but to stay interested and motivated in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. As well as of a diverse ethnic backgrounds as well. By the time this happens, 2035, they're talking about sending people up to Mars for the first time. So if this was the third mission, figure it was 2040, maybe early 2040s. You're going to have a pretty diverse population of scientists and engineers, both ethnically and by gender as well. So I think, given that this is in the near future, I think it's an accurate representation. Things are definitely trending in that direction. I think it's a good thing. Why limit yourself to only a portion of the brain power that a society has open up to everybody? So I'm glad it's represented that way.
A young miss.
Hi.
Hi. How long does it take to get to Mars? Exactly.
Well, it takes a long time. And I wish I had something to illustrate this, but you know how the Earth is going around the sun, right? And Mars is going around the sun too, but Mars is a little farther away. So since farther away, it takes longer. So once every 2 years or so, Mars and Earth are close to each other like that. But what happens is that Earth eventually passes Mars and can wind up on the other side of the sun. Then you're really far apart. So you want to launch when they're really close. So you're talking between 6 and 9 months to get there. And then you're going to be on the ground probably for at least a year because you have to wait for the lineup again. And then it's going to take another 6 months to come home. So a Mars mission is essentially 2 years, at least with the propulsion technology we have today. Now, NASA is designing and experimenting with new propulsion technologies that could shorten the trip, but I'm not going to speculate on the potential of that because I'm not an expert on that. I'm just going by the technology we have today. In the movie, they have essentially a nuclear-powered rocket, which would produce more thrust over longer periods of time, which actually gets you really moving pretty fast. So it might not be as long in the future as it is today.
Yeah, I saw something recently that they said they have a new fuel source that might change everything, but I guess they're always saying.
It's very experimental right now, and when they start testing it, they're not going to test it with people on board. You never test anything new with people on board, just in case something goes wrong.
Cool. I've had the pleasure of coming to the Challenger Space Center. Can you talk a little bit about what you do there and,
Absolutely.
and what everybody gets done?
Absolutely. The Challenger Center, just for the people who don't know, younger people here, back in 1986 when I was in the first grade, there was a shuttle mission where some bad decisions were made. And on launch, the space shuttle broke apart and the astronauts on board were killed. The commander's wife wanted to memorialize the mission by opening up Challenger centers across the country, and we have 2 internationally as well. And the reason that is because the reason that this mission was special is there was a teacher on board. And the teacher was going to be, her name was Krista McAuliffe, and she was going to be doing teaching lessons from space. To memorialize this and the whole education background of the mission, June Scobie, which is the commander's wife, lobbied Congress to open up these centers, which are primarily space education centers, where we have a mock mission control and a mock spacecraft, where children go on one side, and then there are some that go on the other side. So some are in mission control, some are in the spacecraft, They communicate back and forth as if they're doing a mission. We simulate a moon mission, a Mars mission, and a comet mission. It's not only open to kids, anybody can do it. There are public missions that are open. Usually I'm doing birthday parties or scout trips, overnights. But on the second Sunday of the month, we do a planetarium show. We have an inflatable planetarium. On the third Sunday of every month, we do a mock space mission. And anybody can come in. If you're interested in that, I have documents here that I can give you later. But if you are interested in this, you might want to call early because we tend to book up. We also do birthday parties, like I said, and school trips. So if any of your schools are interested in doing something like this, you could get some information from me later on.
Yeah, I know 2 of the schools take a 5th grade field trip there. My daughter and my son both went there.
Airmont, New York.
It's across the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Yeah, exit 14B. So about half an hour, 40 minutes from here.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah,
and you go.
it's right off the throughway.
You cross through a little bit of New Jersey, so you can get cheap gas too when you're there. So it's a good thing. Did we have any more questions? What do you guys think about the ice cream? Is it?
So
It's pretty tasty. Oh, yeah,
yes, I see a question back there.
He's going back with the mic. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jay. Do you know if they used any of the actual Mars pictures or video in this movie at any time?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was curious,
some of
'cause some of it looked familiar.
Yeah, they did use some of the NASA imagery that's been gathered over the years. The surface obviously was not. The surface was a desert in the Middle East. I think it was in Jordan. I forget the name of it off the top of my head. So obviously they couldn't film right on Mars, but they found a desert that simulated Mars pretty well, and used videography techniques to make it cinematography techniques to make it look red. But the aerial views, yeah, they're real. They got them from NASA.
Yes, sir.
Is the movie an accurate representation of how advanced the Chinese are with their booster technology and space technology, space?
Yeah, they're advancing leaps and bounds right now, and in a lot of ways, and I feel we're kind of not in this country. Yeah, they want to do manned missions by 2020, manned-moon missions by 2020. So they're advancing their space program pretty quickly. They want to build their own space station as well. They're not part of the International Space Station. They want to build their own. So yeah, they're advancing pretty quick because they're doing stuff that's been done, so they have that benefit already. But they're also pouring resources into their space program. When in this country, we're really not doing that as well as we should. So they're definitely advancing, and I kind of hope that once they do get to the moon, and I think I said when, not if, because it's going to happen, that it wakes people up in this country, kind of like the way Sputnik did back in 1957, and gets people interested in advancing our own space program as well. I mean, the federal budget, NASA only gets 0.5%. People say, oh, we spend all this money on NASA. No, it's 0.5%. And we get our money's worth. All the stuff that we get from NASA is 0.5 penny on the dollar that from taxes. So if we doubled that, we'd be able to do a whole lot more. Money is the limiting factor in in NASA's new rocket. Money is the limiting factor. We'd be able to develop it much faster if their budget was increased.
Well, it sounds like too that's gone free market. So now that SpaceX and
Well,
stuff like that.
the thing is with SpaceX is you're commercializing low Earth orbit.
Right.
But we're talking beyond low Earth orbit. NASA doesn't need to do that anymore. They've been there, they've done that. We want to get beyond low Earth orbit. We want to get to deeper space missions. We want to do maybe asteroid missions or missions to the moon again, get back to the moon, learn surface operations before we get to Mars. If something goes wrong on the moon, you're only 3 days away. If something goes wrong on Mars, you're 6 to 9 months away. Yeah. So that part of it isn't, the new things is not the free market stuff. The free market stuff is low Earth orbit, and China is moving beyond that.
Right. And some companies are trying to go long-term to get minerals and stuff off asteroids and
that's going to be a long way off, but that's definitely the long-term plan of some industries, of some what's the word I'm looking for? Entrepreneurs. Yes. It's definitely the long-term plan of some entrepreneurs is that, but the technology for that is probably 50 years away at least.
Oh, wow. So anything in the movie that you saw that you said, no?
Just a question.
Oh, yeah.
Matthew?
So,
Oh, yeah.
sorry, there's more questions?
Yeah, just a question. Sometime in the past, I had heard about space junk.
Where's the person
Space
I'm
junk,
talking
she's
to?
back.
Space junk.
Oh, okay.
And I'm
Yes.
wondering, in terms of the kind of thing that was portrayed in the film and any things that fail, what is the status of, I don't know any other word to use except,
In Earth orbit?
yeah, in Earth orbit or any place that
It's
may be.
It's a problem.
And is anything being done about that?
There's some ideas that some people are playing with to try and clean up some of that, or at least be able to contain it a little bit better. But you have to realize these things are going 25,000 miles an hour, at different elevations above the Earth. It would be really, really difficult to get a hold of these things. And we have a pretty good NORAD, Space Command, the military branch of it, keeps a pretty good track of things that are about bigger than that. But once you get smaller than that, it's really hard to keep track of things. And it doesn't take much to do damage to a spacecraft or a satellite in orbit because things are going so quickly. Things are moving so fast.
I think it was sometime in California a couple of years ago where something landed in people's backyards and things like that. That's
I
the
heard
frequency of that kind of thing happening.
I heard of something in England that happening back when Skylab burnt up over Australia back in the 70s. There were pieces that landed in Australia. That's a problem as far as re-entering debris is a problem, especially if it's not controlled. But usually it is controlled, and they try to have them deorbit and burn up over the oceans. If there's an uncontrolled re-entry, there's always a chance it could burn up over land, and some fragments make it down to the surface. But the chances of it doing any real damage would be pretty small. I mean, you have to realize that there are meteors always streaking in our atmosphere, and for the most part, those burn up. Very few reach the surface. So for as far as things that we build, it's not likely that large pieces would reach down to the surface.
Important question. Important. Space 1999 or Battlestar Galactica?
The old Battlestar Galactica or the new one?
Old.
I was actually before my time.
Oh, sorry. Then new.
Space 1999, also before my time.
Oh, wow.
But my father was interested in Star Trek. My father was in the engineering field. So I grew up with the Next Generation Star Trek. And then later on, watched some of the original series. So I'm more a Star Trek person.
Cool.
But there's also Star Wars too. So.
There's Star Wars. That's a whole other fantasy thing. But well, I can't thank you enough for coming down. If you ever get a chance to visit the Challenger Center and see Joel in action, it's a great time, and it's great for kids and great for adults. And like he says, they do parties for everything, and they have all these rockets there, small rockets that they do liftoffs and stuff like that.
Actually, there's something you asked me before. Is there anything in the movie that said that couldn't happen?
Oh, yeah.
Because Mars's atmosphere is so thin, a wind like that would not... There are dust storms on Mars, and they can last for a long, long time. But a 100-mile-an-hour wind would seem like a gentle breeze on Mars because the atmosphere is so thin. So that couldn't happen. And Andy Weir, the author of The Martian, acknowledged that. Another issue that isn't really dealt with in the book nor the movie is radiation. When you leave Earth's atmosphere and the protection of Earth's magnetic field, you're exposed to radiation from the sun and cosmic rays from space. Mars has no inherent magnetic field. There's no protection from this radiation. Obviously not, and also when you're going between two objects in space, same thing. So that would be an issue that would have to be dealt with if we ever going to go to Mars long term. It might not cause immediate health issues, but Mark Watney would probably die a few years earlier from some cancer of some sort because of the exposure to radiation over that long period of time. And quite frankly, everyone who was on board for that long period of time would have had that problem. There was a question I saw on the screen, on the sign outside. I forgot what the question was off the top of my head. that I wanted to address.
There's a question back here.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
I remember reading a long time ago in some article that it was possible to create an atmosphere.
Yeah.
And the question I have for you is, A, did I read that right? And then B, if I did, is it possible to create an atmosphere on Mars?
Well, Mars has a base atmosphere to start with, but it's not a very thick atmosphere, and the reason it's not a very thick atmosphere is actually twofold. It's actually thought that Mars, when Mars was younger, when its interior was hot, and it did generate a magnetic field, and it had active volcanoes that had a thicker atmosphere, and it was warmer, and you had liquid water on the surface. Mars, being a smaller planet, cooled fast, lost its internal heat, and lost its ability to maintain a magnetic field. Once that happens, the solar wind essentially erodes the atmosphere and it gets stripped off into space. Mars is able to hang on to a little bit of an atmosphere because of its gravity, but because Mars is so small, not much of one. Now, there is frozen gas at the poles of Mars, frozen carbon dioxide, or what we call on Earth dry ice. If you could melt that or vaporize it by focusing the sun's light, you could vaporize that carbon dioxide and thicken the Martian atmosphere. That would make it warmer. That could start having you be able to have liquid water on the surface again. So you would have an atmosphere at that point, but it wouldn't, a thicker atmosphere, but it wouldn't be like Earth's. What you're talking about is something called terraforming, which basically means take another planet, make it more similar to Earth and some Earth's atmosphere so we could live on it. So we would have to add oxygen. So we'd have to have some sort of photosynthetic organisms on the surface once we have liquid water to grow and produce oxygen for the atmosphere. The problem is that Mars still doesn't have a magnetic field, so any atmosphere that you would produce would be temporary. How long it would last would be how thick of an atmosphere you could get in the first place. So while it's theoretically possible and in the future might even be plausible, it's not something that we can do right now. It's science fiction. It's not science fiction per se because it's something that the science is sound and it's something that can be done, but we just don't have the technology to do it at this point. It's possible. You're welcome. There's actually one other thing I want to do, and this is kind of a little bit of a surprise.
Please, I'm surprised. I'm excited.
For Halloween, I decided to be Mark Watney.
Oh, there
So
you go. Oh,
I figured if there's any questions you wanted to ask Mark Watney, maybe since we're in a theater, maybe we could do a little play acting with that.
There you go. Does anybody want to ask Mark Watney any questions about his time on Mars or before or after? What did he do? Anybody? Yeah, kind of covered that. That's a good one.
Well, let's put it this way. Everything is good in moderation.
Well, speaking
But
of
if there's all there is, you get a little tired of it after a while. Maybe after the first 500 times you hear it.
speaking of everything good in moderation, can you even look at potatoes anymore? Or
I went to, after the media calmed down, and I was able to have somewhat of a private life. You know, I decided to treat myself, and I went to McDonald's, and I got a Big Mac, and they asked me if I wanted fries, and I said no, no fries. They said, well, it's only 50 cents more. Like, no, no fries. I can't really look at potatoes.
ever again?
But speaking of potatoes, I remember what that question was. It was, could somebody survive just on potatoes?
Yeah.
No. Potatoes are very calorie rich. So, because they're basically starch, and the body breaks down the starch into sugars, which your body needs, but that's just energy. There's also nutrients you need, like the different vitamins you need. If you don't have vitamin C, you're going to get scurvy. If you don't have vitamin D, your bones are going to get weak. You don't have different nutrients, different things will happen to you because of that deficiency. This was actually not addressed in the movie. It was addressed in the book. They had plenty of multivitamins that were sent up just as part of the medical supplies. So the potatoes were just calories. That was just so his body had fuel to work with. The nutrients were basically vitamin supplements. So someone can't live on potatoes alone, but if you have nutrient supplements, you can do it.
Cool. What's it like to drive on Mars?
You can't go too fast. If you go too fast, sometimes the sand's a little soft, and you get stuck. So there's something that was not addressed here. There was something that happened that was not addressed in the film. As I was ascending into Schiaparelli crater, I hit a bit of a soft spot, and the rover turned over, and the trailer turned over and then pulled the rover down with it, and so I had to turn it upright again, and it was a pain, but no, there wasn't any serious damage. But after that, I went really, really, really slow. I just hit a soft patch of sand and went over. So after that, it was really, really, really slow and really, really, really boring. Driving on Mars is really boring. It's like driving in the middle of the United States where it's flat and there's nothing to see except corn, and you get bored. But you do what you got to do.
What was it like to take off? Besides the
Nothing
emotional
like the
part.
simulators on Earth. Because we had to go so fast on launch, and we had removed so much mass, the acceleration was upwards of 12 Gs. Essentially, take your weight, multiply it by 12, put it on your chest. There are exercises that I was able to do to keep myself conscious for longer, but sooner or later, just the blood drained out of my brain, and I went unconscious, and my ribs broke, and it's just the human body isn't meant to go under that stress for that long. So it wasn't fun. I wouldn't do it again. And they do put you in they put you in a centrifuge when you're doing astronaut training to get you to practice what you need to do on launch with, you have these high G situations, but they usually don't go up that high. So that was new for me.
So would you ever want to go back after an experience like that, or you had enough?
I think my role at NASA is to teach and to be there as an advisor, as an advisory role. I think the time I spent on Mars is more than enough. There's something to be said by having alone time, but too much alone time it messes with your head. I'd rather not do that again if I don't have to.
Cool.
Can I have two
Yep.
questions? Yeah, two quick
Yes.
questions. Towards the end of the movie, when you were getting dressed, I could see that you had more than just bruises and everything all over your body. Do you think that was a reaction from not having the vitamin C? It was the rickets.
I think that
starting
was
to
part of
set in?
it.
I thought it was.
I think also just the heavy labor I was doing in a spacesuit that's designed to be mobile, but I was doing way, way more intense labor than that suit was designed for. So it's that, but as well as just chafing in the suit.
And could you tell me, what was it that caused that explosion in your garden? What was it that triggered that explosion?
The hab was designed for 30 days of repressurizing and depressurizing for 30 days. It lasted way beyond that, and just the constant pressure of depressurizing and repressurizing just stressed the material to the point where it failed. That could have been a lot worse, but that's what happened. Everything that I used was used way beyond it was designed for. I'm thankful nothing else went wrong. Nothing else broke down.
A couple more questions down here for astronaut Commander. Yeah, Commander Wally. Yeah, he's bringing the mic.
When you got cut down to a minimum calorie diet, how low was that, and how much weight did you lose during the course of the mission?
They didn't have scales. They didn't bring scales with us. So I can't give you an exact number. But I was down to about 1,000 calories a day. My body was working mostly on what reserves I had as far as, body fat and muscle, supplementing from that. But I can't really say what my weight was, because by the time I got back to Earth, actually I had put on a little bit more mass, given the fact that I was being well fed again. And they don't have scales on the Hermes because I lost all my weight, but I gained it all back when I came back to Earth. So to give you an exact number, I can't tell you.
There you go. A question down here. This gentleman with his hand up.
How did it feel when you ran out of ketchup?
Well, at least, with ketchup, potatoes taste a little bit better with ketchup. I had salt and I had pepper, and don't do this at home, but, the Vicodin helped here and there. I ate it because there was nothing else to eat, but don't ask me to eat a raw potato. Don't ask me to eat a potato with nothing on it down here. I can barely even look at potatoes as it is. I didn't like it, but in a situation like that, you do things that you would normally not want to do, or things you might not like to do, because it's that or die. And when you have a choice between survive or not, you always pick survive, no matter what you have to do to do it.